Sputnik Radio.
4 weeks and 4 days until the Scottish parliamentary elections 2021. It's a very confused, complicated, convoluted electoral system that is in play in those elections. And you'll be relieved to know I don't intend to take you through a seminar on the D'Hondt principles of indirect and direct elections. Suffice to say that a part of the Parliament is elected first past the post in individual constituencies, and another part of the Parliament is, as it were, used as a top-up. Another part of the election, a second ballot paper, an orange ballot paper, as it happens, elects lists, and the number of people on your list that you get into the Parliament is proportionate to the number of votes that are cast for it. I said at the beginning that according to the Sunday Times opinion poll this morning, Alex Salmond, the founder of the Albaha party, is now on 6%, meaning that he would be elected and may take some of his friends in with him. I'm not that happy about the wording of the opinion poll because it gave us options: the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democratic Party, Albaha, brackets led by Alex Salmond, close brackets. And the other one was All for Unity, which I founded and for which I'm a candidate. If it had said in brackets, founded by George Galloway, I would have done better, but I did well enough to make all the journalists in Scotland sit up and take notice, though not yet sufficiently to pick up the phone and ask me for an interview. Thus, I'm at 4% in the opinion polls, without a single television interview, without a single radio interview, since I returned to Scotland last summer. You may think it odd that a person who once was relatively prominent in Scottish politics, returning to their homeland and running for election, is a matter of such indifference to the Scottish political press corps. But I couldn't possibly comment. But the important thing is not what happens to me and not what happens to Alex Salmond, but what happens to Scotland. The SNP, having signed the Edinburgh Agreement, that they accepted that the 2014 referendum would be decisive, which has a clear and specific meaning in the English language, would be a decisive referendum, the result of which both sides must accept. But in truth, they have never accepted it. They have never accepted that they lost, and comprehensively, by more than 55% to fewer than 45%. They never accepted it. There was a Thanksgiving service, a service of reconciliation in an Edinburgh church, held a couple of days after the referendum poll. Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon never turned up. And I suppose we should have read more into that than we did at the time. It is quite clear that Scotland is now locked in a neverendum. The result was not accepted, and every matter has been defined thereafter according to the grudge and grievance of nationalism, separatism. I'm against nationalism, against separatism. Always have been, everywhere. I don't agree with it. No good ever comes from it. In that regard, at least, I'm in agreement with my next guest. He was a former advisor to the Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair, a former advisor to the Australian Labour Party leader and Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. He also advised the former leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Jim Murphy, and is now on his own account, not just a political analyst and commentator, number cruncher, but one of the very best and in very great demand. And that's why I'm amazed that he's here as a Scotsman and not receiving any fee for it. It's John McTurner. John, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. I hope that didn't come as a rude surprise to you that you're not being paid, because I know people pay you a lot for your analyses. So it's good of you to come on for free. Give us your overview, will you, of where we stand 4 weeks out from the Holyrood elections.
I think we are seeing a historic split in the SNP and the independence movement more generally. I think that there's been extraordinary discipline on the side of the Yes campaign, starting with, as you pointed out, them refusing to accept defeat, to act as though they'd won, though they hadn't, and then to have a strategy in which they do pursue grudge and grievance. You might call it grievo-max.
Very good.
Anything that's done, they will complain about, and nothing that is good that comes from being within the United Kingdom is ever recognised, even to the point of during the COVID pandemic, to not call their Nightingale hospitals, but to find some obscure Scottish nurse to name them after instead, someone nobody has ever heard of. I can't even remember now. But they held this together with some discipline, with disagreement on tactics, disagreement sometimes on strategy, but never falling out, never having fights. And this drama we're in now with the Albaha party and Alex Salmond seeking to return to Parliament, and wouldn't that be a great Parliament, a Scottish Parliament with you in it and Alex Salmond in it? That would certainly be great. It would box office, political box office television. But what you're really seeing is the fight between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, partly because Alec feels that he has been written out of history. He, in his mind, took the country so close to independence that you can almost feel it, almost touch it. And he believes one more heave and you could get there. And he sees all of that adulation going to Nicola Sturgeon. And you also feel Nicola Sturgeon feeling, I was your apprentice, you've retired, don't come back, and I will use every trick in the book that I have to keep you out of politics, out of Scottish politics, stop you recovering. And in the end, what has happened is this psychodrama has grown and grown and grown. It erupted in the Parliament with the committee inquiry into the conduct of the Scottish Government in how it investigated allegations against Alex Salmond, and remarkably for something, errors which cost £1 million to the taxpayer, not a single civil servant, not a single advisor, not a single politician has been sacked. So, and I've got no doubt that the SNP will say that this election is going to be the judgment on that. Well, in a funny way, this election is going to be a judgment on that, because Alex Salmond has split the SNP. He's taken MPs from the SNP. He's taken leading councillors from the SNP, and he plans to take votes from the SNP. Now, he's gaming the system. He admits he's gaming the system, but he could, at 6%, 7% of the vote, that threshold, could be bringing in new parliamentary seats, and he'll have a group in the Scottish Parliament, and he will hope that he denies Nicola Sturgeon the majority in her own right, which is very hard to achieve, and provides the votes that take her over the majority threshold. He said he won't seek a role in government. He'll be an advisor, supporter. I think his plan is to be Eamon de Valera to her Michael Collins. He will be outflanking her, being more radical than her, calling for a Catalan option, calling for UDI even. Although, of course, the Scottish Parliament can't leave the UK Parliament to sit separately. They'll just sit separately. So I think this is a historic split in the nationalist movement. It's a psychodrama but it's very serious. And at the same time, we have the situation in Scottish Parliament, which you're highlighting with your party, that around 45% of the votes, election in, election out in the Scottish Parliament, go to parties who don't want to sunder the United Kingdom, and yet they get a handful of seats. They get far fewer seats than the nationalist parties. So something is going on the nationalist side. Something is going on in the Labour Party with their impressive new leader. Something is going on in the Tory Party with their more aggressive approach. And something's going on in that there's a whole group of what I call Lexit voters in Scotland, unrepresented. The 40% of people who voted to leave the European Union, we've left the European Union, who don't actually want to return to the clutches of Brussels, don't want the euro imposed on the country, don't want to have to pay to the unaccountable bureaucrats of Europe, don't want to go back, back to the future. So I think there's a lot of going on in Scottish politics, but at the moment we're all focused, aren't we, as you said, and not in the polls and in other ways, in discussions about the campaign for the list seats, the campaign for people's second vote. Yes, and now before we come back to that, to what extent is it all personal, this rupture? And to what extent is it really De Valera Collins? Because Alex Salmond had plenty of opportunities to behave in an illegal way, but he never took them. And now he's hinting, nudging and winking that the illegal path, even UDI, might be the way forward. But can we really believe that? I mean, the Catalan option is one thing, John, but you'd be lucky if it stayed at the Catalan level of pushing and shoving. It could get to much more dramatic problems on the streets in Scotland if one proceeded down that road. In other words, what I'm saying is Salmond bluffing? I don't think Salmond is bluffing. I think Salmond is improvising. Salmond is the master improviser of politics. He's a man who's convinced he's got a date with destiny. And if you listen to his speeches, his rhetoric is very often, they said we could never. They said we could never form a government, which isn't true. They said we could never have a referendum, which also isn't true. He quite often says, they said we could never do it, about something that nobody said, and I did it. And now he is trying a revival at a time when, in Scottish opinion polls, he is even less popular than Boris Johnson. So he definitely has a sense of conviction in his own talents, his own ability, his place in history. The question about what he's doing and saying now compared to what he did and said when he was First Minister is a good one. And I think it goes to, he would argue that you use different tactics, different strategies at different historical conjunctures. The time is different now than it was when he was the First Minister. The onward march of constitutional nationalism, I think he would say, has reached its end point, facing off against Boris Johnson. You and I might say the ego has landed, and that this is, as it always was, about Alec. It's not about Scotland. It's not about nationalism. It's not about independence. It's not about separation. This is about one man, and that he hated having the limelight taken away from him when he went to London as an MP, and Nicola Sturgeon got the rock star style receptions. But the thing is, he has a ready audience within the independence movement, and this is the nub of this. Great improvisers, great politicians see the weakness in their opponents, and what is interesting is that Alex Salmond is fixed laser-like on Nicola Sturgeon as his opponent. She too on him. She is less able to find the way to give him the blow that will lay him out. He is seeing within the independence movement, there are many who are now getting impatient with the promise of there'll be a referendum next year, that the referendum is always in the future. And he's tapping into that. So I think that for all those votes that stay behind the SNP in their constituency seats, for all those people who stay with the SNP in their second vote, when Alex Salmond leads himself or a group of members of the Scottish Parliament into the Scottish Parliament for the session that will start after the elections, it doesn't stop there. His opponent will be Nicola Sturgeon. His opponent, he will be opposing her strategy. And it will be joyous, I think, for Boris Johnson to be watching this, seeing the dissipation of a force which just months ago was looking like it might well place a demand on him that he would refuse, but it would look churlish or even anti-democratic of him to refuse. Now it looks as though it's the nationalist movement with their slippery alliance with the Green Party, who are not a Green Party, they're just an independence party, and their strange relationship, their codependence on Alex Salmond and his Albaha party, that will be a very good thing for Boris Johnson. I think Boris Johnson's a lucky politician, a terrible record in the pandemic, but lucky at the end with the vaccine. And once again, it looks like he's going to be the lucky politician, facing a very difficult situation in Scotland, sorted out by probably his worst single enemy, Alex Salmond.
Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, John, it's the 1-year anniversary of Sir Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party. If you were writing his report card, what would you say?
I would say really two things. He took over a party on life support, and he's made the Labour Party and himself relevant. And the second thing is he made it relevant and listened to in the most difficult of contexts. A pandemic, which is not just a UK crisis, a global pandemic. An economic crisis, which is the worst probably in recorded history in the UK. That in those, naturally the attention of voters gravitates to the government, they have the bully pulpit, and also to the actions of the government in handling the pandemic, sorting it through vaccination, supporting the economy, mapping the route out. I think without Keir Starmer, there are many areas where the government would have acted in a more cruel way. That I think the £20 extra on universal credit would have been taken off by Rishi Sunak earlier this year. But the opposition of Keir Starmer and Labour have kept it in place. He's got the hearing, the one quick hearing from the voters, which is, okay, we could consider you as a potential prime minister. And then the attention has gone on to the pandemic. After you get a landslide defeat, you're meant to sort your own party out. And he probably should be sending his deputy, Angela Rayner, out to be telling constituency parties we got beaten badly, we must abandon the policies on which we lost so badly. But I think he has got, for me, he's an A+, not just for not being Corbyn, but for actually getting a hearing for the Labour Party, and an A+ for actually maintaining a voice at the hardest of moments during the pandemic. And I think the real test is going to be perhaps in October, November, when we're back at work, we're back on the buses, when we're back in the office, when we see what the real unemployment is going to be like. We see maybe the real face of Rishi Sunak taking money away from the poorest. It was the £20 increase in universal credit for a single person. That one increase was bigger than all of the increases in unemployment benefit from between 1975 and last year when the £20 was put on. Like, it's one of the biggest single increases to single individuals. And so for single men, single women on universal credit, as many more will be in October and autumn, we can't stop unemployment rising. That'll be when they feel what the real Tory government are like. And Sir Keir Starmer then has to be absolutely clear about the difficult challenge of opposition, which is have the right ideas for the future, which the voters hear, the voters like, and the government can't steal from you. And that takes art as much.